In an earlier video, we had a look at my Seiko Presage SRPF01J1, also known as the Matcha, which is a limited edition watch with a beautifully textured dial. But what if I told you that wasn't my only Presage? What if I told you it wasn't my only limited edition Presage? What if I told you it wasn't my only limited edition Presage with a beautifully textured dial? And what if I told you Welcome to Addicted to Watches. Today, we're looking at a watch that is very special to me for a few reasons. It was the first watch that I ever paid full retail price for buying new as my collection grew, and it has become a very sought after watch. It's the OG Presage limited edition that kicked them all off. This is the Seiko Cocktail Time SRPC01, also known as the Starlight. The Seiko Cocktail Time collection is an interesting one. It all came about off the back of the popularity of the Saab 065 with an ice blue dial and fantastic radial pattern. It was a very classy dress watch and came from the same era as the Saab 033, 35 and 17. Seiko were looking to move forward and drew on it for the inspiration to create the Cocktail Time series in a wider range of colours, including a deeper, richer blue and brown, but all sharing that same radial texture. These two were very popular for obvious reasons, and soon Seiko wanted to do something a little bit different in the line. So, they decided to release a limited edition, inspired by drinks at the Star Bar in Ginza, Japan. After all, the line was called Cocktail Time, so why not take inspiration from a real cocktail? For this watch, they did something a little bit different with the dial to the rest of the line, however. This particular one was inspired by, you guessed it, a drink named the Starlight. There were actually two separate releases of this watch from Seiko. This SRPC01 for the international market, and the SARY085 for the Japanese market. Interestingly, the international release saw a limit of 3,500 pieces, whereas the Japanese release was only 1,300 pieces. Anyway, let's take a closer look at the star of the show. Instead of that radial pattern that created a very dynamic shift in colour and tone depending on the light, a more subtle approach was taken for this one. The dial has a very fine, almost engraved or etched texture that can be hard to see from a distance, but up close is mesmerising. It also features a subtle fume from lighter blue to darker around the edges. In some lights, the dial looks very plain and simple, but in others it really comes to life. From the moment I saw this in the boutique window, I could not stop thinking about it until the day I eventually plucked up the courage to hand over my hard-earned money. On the dial below 12 is the Seiko logo that has been applied in silver and is somewhat small on the dial, but it is balanced well by the printing below the pinion. There are just two lines of text, the word Presage in a larger size, and below that in a similar size but the same font, Automatic. I'm glad Seiko held back from printing anything else on the dial, like limited edition or Star Bar. This is, in my opinion, a very classy watch, and too much text on the dial would have ruined that. Around the dial marking the hours, there are multifaceted applied arrowheads, with polished outer sides and a frosted section running down the middle for legibility. We'll see this technique used again soon. At the 12, 3, 6 and 9, the markers are larger, indicating the cardinal points. But the one at 3 is truncated to make way for a date complication. While not exactly colour matched, it is a black date wheel, which helps it not to stand out. The frame around it is applied just like the hour markers. Finally, around the very edge of the dial is a minute track printed in white. Each minute is marked as well as 1/6 of a minute. Some may not like this, but I do, as it provides a little bit of visual detail on the watch without being overbearing. As I mentioned, the dial is the star of the show here, and the reason that this watch has become such a desirable model compared to some other limited editions in the Cocktail Time series. It's understated and subtle, but not simple. There is a work of art hiding here if you can manage to get close enough to have a good look and really see the fine details. It's not something that someone would notice walking past on the street, but something that only the wearer knows and understands. And I believe that's how it should be. The point of wearing a nice watch like this is not to impress others, but to have something on your wrist that you appreciate and like because you know what it is. That may not be everyone's opinion, but it's mine. So, we know that a limited edition Cocktail Time gets you an interesting dial, but what else does it get you? I usually don't talk about this aspect of a watch because it's not that important in the grand scheme of things, but this one is a little different, so I will. In the standard black cardboard box from Seiko, you have a card with a picture of the drink that inspired the watch, as well as a recipe on the back to make it yourself if you want to. And the inner box is entirely covered in this dark blue velvet with silver lettering. This box feels to me the same way the dial looks. Actually, this idea of a different box is something that Seiko continued. The box from my matcha is not your standard Seiko box either. But, back to the watch, let's take a look around the case. It's fairly simple, which I'm fine with, since I wouldn't want it to take any attention away from the dial. It's actually the same case that is used for other Cocktail Time watches, and my matcha Presage is the exact same case, just scaled down a little bit. That said, it's a fully polished 3-piece case with a very slim bezel and straight lugs. Usually, being entirely polished would put me off, but the slim bezel means that you don't really see that much when looking from the front, and it doesn't stand out. The mid-case is flat with no curve at all, and the crown is unguarded. This crown is not quite an onion crown, but does increase in size as it leaves the case, and features the Seiko S signed on it. It's quite large in comparison to the watch, and that makes it easy to grip and turn. In terms of measurements, the watch is slightly bigger than you'd expect, coming in with a case diameter of 40.5mm. But thankfully it wears it quite well. Lug to lug is manageable at 47.5, and even with that domed crystal, the watch is not very thick at 11.8mm. The distance between the lugs is a standard 20mm, which is great because a lot of straps work really well on this watch. Overall, it's a good size for me, and even with the slim bezel making this watch basically all dial, I feel that it doesn't wear too big or look out of proportion. From the back, we can see right through the display caseback to the inner workings of the movement. This watch houses a Seiko 4R35, otherwise known as the NH35, and, while fairly standard, a golden rotor has been used to jazz it up a little and mark it as a limited edition. Seiko seems to have a tendency to introduce a bit of gold to signify a limited edition. They did the same thing on the clasp of my SLGA007. Anyway, if you don't know the 4R35 by now, then you'll need to come out from beneath the rock you've been living under. It hacks, it hand winds, it beats at 3 Hz or 6 times per second, and is generally considered a reliable workhorse movement. I've had and have lots of these in watches, and they've never given me any real problems. Around the caseback is the usual spec sheet, as well as the number of this limited edition. I was very lucky with mine. When watches are numbered, people often want as low a number as possible, and not only did I get a very low number, I also got the number of the date of my birthday. Like I said, this watch is very special to me, and I don't see myself ever selling it. Turning the watch back over, and we have the crystal. The crystal is very heavily box domed, and I love it. It's just Hardlex rather than sapphire, but there are upgrades you can buy, such as replacement crystals. The doming creates some very pleasant distortions from sharp angles. The curve of the crystal also follows that of the bezel, helping the watch to feel very rounded and slip under a cuff quite easily. Now, the brown leather strap that I currently have on this watch is not the original strap, of course. I changed out the original strap shortly after I got the watch, because I felt this suited it much better. The original strap is this dark blue number with a crocodile pattern. It also came with a branded deployant clasp that I have used on other watches, but interestingly, this band was only made to be used with that clasp. There is no cutout for the tang of the buckle, so a traditional one wouldn't work on this strap. It's very soft and smells nice, but as you can see from the little to no wear on it, I've never actually used it. If there was any lume on the watch now, is probably when I'd talk to you about it, but of course there is none. It is a dress watch after all, so lume is not expected. It doesn't do bad for itself in terms of legibility though. The Dauphine hands on the watch are finished in a way to make it highly legible even in lower light settings. The hour and minute hands have a bevel running down the middle. One side of each is polished to catch and reflect light, while the other half is done in a frosted finish, meaning it doesn't always need to be reflecting light to be seen. This means that at least half of each hand is always visible, and the markers have a similar frosted finish down the middle as mentioned. The second hand is quite a simple needle hand with a hollowed diamond counterbalance. Okay, we've waited long enough, let's see how it wears. If you have, or have tried on any of the other Cocktail Time watches, it'll wear exactly the same as those do, since it's the same case. That is to say, it wears very neatly. Those lugs point down nicely to help the watch hug the wrist, and the relatively low height of the watch, even with the doming of the crystal, make it very comfortable to wear. It's pushing the upper limits of size for a dress watch, but still looks reasonable on my 7-inch wrist. Changing straps, you can see that this watch can be dressed up or even down. It looks very at home on this mesh strap from my Pagani design. It looks similarly as good on this lighter brown leather strap I have here. And, love it or hate it, I kind of like it on this dark grey suede strap. Something about the texture of the dial and the texture of the strap together really does it for me. But wait, I can hear you saying. Nothing you've said really has anything to do with the title of the video. Same but different. Well, yes and no. I mentioned that there were 2 separate releases of this watch, one for the international market and one for the Japanese market. Some passionate collectors and Seiko enthusiasts who have had the chance to compare them say that the dial on the Japanese release is slightly different. It has a slightly richer, slightly greener center to the blue in the dial. That would be right, wouldn't it? The Japanese saving the best for themselves. Well, recently I was very lucky to come across one of these Japanese SARY085 watches for sale for a reasonable price. And the kicker is that it's basically in mint condition. Like on mine, the strap hasn't even been used, and the clasp still has stickers on it. So, let's compare these dials and see for ourselves. Interestingly, the strap on the watch is different from the one mine originally came with. Instead of a matte crocodile pattern strap, this one is plain but quite shiny. I think I actually prefer this one for the watch. I'm not sure how well it shows up on camera, but I can say that though slight, there is definitely a difference in the dials. The international release on the left here has a slightly more purple hue to the blue, whereas the Japanese release on the right has a slightly greener one. It might also be a little bit darker as it gets to the edge with that fume effect. However, I think I prefer the richer colour of the Japanese release, but I don't know if I'll be able to bring myself to wear it to take it from mint to lightly used condition. So, it goes without saying that I really like the watch. I like it so much I bought a second one when I had the chance to. To be honest, I don't even know if there's anything I'd change about the watch if I could. Maybe knock a millimeter or so off the case size, but that's about it. It's not even a big deal to me. In summary, me likey. I'm just both glad and very lucky I was able to buy mine when it first came out, and then this one now from Japan too. What do you think about this watch? Can you see the difference in dial color, or am I just imagining things? Am I crazy for buying another one? Have you got one of these or another Presage? Let me know in the comments, and I'll see you next time.